When a Filipino sang Elvis, and sounded even better, the judges laughed at first, but by the end, the entire room was on its feet, some in tears, witnessing a moment no one would ever forget. If you believe talent can come from the most unexpected places, stay with me until the end of this story, because what happened that night didn't just change one man's life, it reminded the world that greatness has no address. And if stories like this move you, don't forget to like the video and subscribe, because the next voice that changes your heart might be just one story away. Miguel Reyes was 27 years old, born and raised in a small coastal barangay in Cebu, Philippines. His home was a one-room wooden house standing on uneven stilts above the shoreline. When the tide rose, the water would kiss the bamboo steps. When storms came, the walls trembled like frightened hands. But inside that fragile home lived a dream stronger than concrete. Miguel's father had once been a fisherman with a voice that echoed across the sea. On quiet nights, he would sing songs by Elvis Presley while untangling fishing nets. Miguel was only 6 when he first heard "Can't Help Falling in Love" drifting through the salty air. He didn't understand the English words back then, but he understood the emotion. His father sang not perfectly, but honestly. And that honesty wrapped around Miguel's heart. Then one typhoon season changed everything. His father never returned from the sea. After that, Miguel stopped singing for a while. His mother took laundry jobs. Miguel quit school at 16 to work construction. Dust replaced melody. Exhaustion replaced dreams. But every night, after work, when everyone slept, he would sit outside with an old second-hand guitar missing one string and whisper sing Elvis songs into the darkness. It felt like talking to his father. Years passed. Friends teased him gently. "You think you're Elvis?" they laughed. He would smile and shrug. "No," he'd say softly. "I just miss my dad." One afternoon, while delivering hollow blocks at a roadside cafe, Miguel noticed a television replaying auditions from a famous American talent show, America's Got Talent. Contestants from around the world stood on that stage, shaking but hopeful. He watched a janitor get a golden buzzer. He watched a shy teenager silence a mocking crowd. Something stirred inside him, something he had buried for years. What if? The thought terrified him. He began saving every extra peso. He skipped meals. He worked overtime. His mother noticed the exhaustion in his eyes but also the spark. When he finally told her he wanted to audition in America, she didn't laugh. She didn't discourage him. She placed her rough hands on his cheeks and said, "Your father's voice lives in you. Don't let it drown." A year later, holding a borrowed suitcase and wearing his only formal outfit, a slightly oversized white blazer bought from a thrift shop, Miguel stood in line outside the massive theater in Los Angeles. The building alone felt bigger than his entire neighborhood back home. Contestants around him had stylists, vocal coaches, confident laughter. Miguel had calloused hands and a prayer whispered in Cebuano. When his name was called, his heart pounded so loudly he thought the microphone would pick it up. The judges sat before him, including the famously blunt Simon Cowell. The audience buzzed with curiosity. Miguel's accent was thick. His nerves were visible. He introduced himself shyly. When asked what he would sing, he answered, "An Elvis song, sir." A few people in the audience chuckled. Simon raised an eyebrow. "That's a big risk," he said. "Elvis is Elvis." Miguel nodded. "Yes, sir." The music began. The familiar opening notes of "If I Can Dream" filled the auditorium. For half a second, his voice trembled. Then something shifted. It wasn't imitation. It wasn't karaoke. It wasn't even nostalgia. It was raw, aching emotion shaped into sound. Miguel's voice carried gravel and gold at the same time. He didn't try to be Elvis, he sang like a son calling across the ocean to a father he missed. His accent gave the lyrics a new texture, a new sincerity. When he reached the high notes, they didn't feel rehearsed. They felt earned. The laughter disappeared. Phones slowly lowered. A woman in the front row covered her mouth. Simon leaned forward. By the second chorus, the energy in the room had transformed. The band glanced at each other in disbelief. This construction worker from Cebu wasn't just covering Elvis. He was resurrecting something deeper, the soul of the song. When he hit the final note, he didn't oversing it. He let it ring, steady and clear, before allowing it to soften like a fading sunset. Silence. A long, stunned silence. Then the explosion. The audience rose to their feet as if pulled by invisible strings. Cheers shook the theater. One judge wiped tears. Simon stood slowly, clapping with a small smile that spoke louder than any compliment. "You know what?" Simon said when the noise settled. "You didn't try to be Elvis. You were Miguel. And honestly, that was extraordinary." Miguel blinked rapidly, trying to process the moment. For years he had sung to the sea. Now the world was listening. He received 4 yes that night. But the real challenge began afterward. Social media clips went viral. Headlines read, "Filipino construction worker stuns America." With praise came pressure. Interviews, rehearsals, expectations. People started calling him the better Elvis. He hated that title. He never wanted to compete with a legend. He just wanted to honor a memory. During rehearsals for the semifinals, doubt crept in. What if the first audition was luck? What if he couldn't live up to the hype? He called his mother one night, voice heavy. "I'm scared," he admitted. She laughed gently. "You were scared of the sea too," she reminded him. "But you still learned to swim." For the semifinals, he chose a different song, "Bridge Over Troubled Water," arranged in a way that blended English lyrics with a soft Filipino harmony in the final verse. He wanted to represent where he came from. He wanted every overseas worker watching to feel seen. That performance didn't rely on power. It relied on vulnerability. And once again, the audience felt it. Judges praised his growth, his authenticity, his heart. He advanced to the finals. On finale night, under blinding lights and millions of viewers worldwide, Miguel stood center stage. He thought about the wooden house above the sea. About his father's weathered hands. About the nights he sang to the darkness, thinking no one would ever hear him. He closed his eyes and whispered, "This is for you, Papa." He sang an original song, one inspired by Elvis but written from his own journey. It spoke of storms, of loss, of hope rising like morning tide. His voice cracked once, not from weakness, but from truth. And that crack made the moment human. When the final votes were announced, Miguel didn't win first place. He came in second. But when the camera zoomed in on his face, there was no disappointment, only gratitude. Because he understood something deeper, he had already won the battle that mattered. He had proven to himself that dreams buried under poverty, grief, and distance can still breathe again. After the show, record labels called. He toured internationally. He built a stronger home for his mother back in Cebu. But he never stopped visiting the shore at sunset whenever he returned home. He would bring his guitar, sit by the water, and sing the same Elvis song his father once sang. Locals say his voice sounds even richer now. Not because it's louder, but because it carries a story. And that's what made him unforgettable, not that he sounded better than Elvis, but that he sounded like himself, shaped by struggle and love. So if you're watching this and you feel your dream is too small, your accent too heavy, your background too humble, remember Miguel. Remember that a construction worker from a coastal village stood on one of the biggest stages in the world and turned laughter into applause. Talent can open a door, but heart kicks it wide open. If this story touched you even a little, take a second to like the video and subscribe to the channel, because somewhere out there, another hidden voice is waiting for courage. And maybe, just maybe, that voice is yours. When a Filipino sang Elvis, and sounded even better, the crowd expected a joke, but what they witnessed instead became one of the most unforgettable moments in talent show history. Before we begin, I want you to imagine something. Imagine carrying a dream so fragile that you're almost afraid to say it out loud. Imagine loving a voice so much that it becomes the only thing that keeps you going when life falls apart. Now imagine standing on a stage where the world is ready to judge you in seconds. If you've ever felt underestimated, stay with me until the end. And if stories like this inspire you, don't forget to like this video and subscribe, because sometimes the next story you hear might be the one that changes your life. In a narrow alley in Manila, where jeepneys roared past cracked sidewalks and neighbors knew each other's struggles by heart, lived a 24-year-old delivery rider named Daniel Cruz. Every morning, Daniel strapped on his helmet and drove through traffic delivering food to offices he could never afford to enter as a customer. He smiled politely, handed over receipts, and left before anyone noticed him twice. But at night, everything changed. At night, Daniel became someone else. Inside his tiny rented room, barely big enough for a mattress and electric fan, he would stand in front of a mirror holding a cheap microphone plugged into a second-hand speaker. He would slick back his hair with water, straighten his posture, and sing songs by Elvis Presley. Not because he wanted fame, but because his grandfather once told him, "When Elvis sings, you feel brave." His grandfather had been a huge Elvis fan. Old vinyl records filled their wooden cabinet. Daniel grew up listening to Suspicious Minds and Love Me Tender while sitting cross-legged on the floor. His grandfather used to say, "Music makes poor men feel rich." When his grandfather passed away, the house felt empty. The records stopped spinning. Daniel's father worked overseas, his mother struggled with debts, and Daniel left college to help support the family. The dream of singing professionally felt selfish compared to unpaid bills. Still, he never stopped singing. One evening, while delivering food to a mall, Daniel passed a massive poster announcing auditions for Asia's Got Talent. The prize money was life-changing. The stage was enormous. The judges were intimidating, including the famously hard-to-impress Simon Cowell, who was guest judging that season. Daniel stared at the poster longer than he should have. He laughed at himself. Elvis? In 2026? People will think I'm outdated. But something inside him whispered, "Try." The audition day arrived faster than he expected. He borrowed a white suit jacket from a wedding singer in his neighborhood. It was slightly tight at the shoulders and a bit too long at the sleeves, but it was the closest he would ever get to looking like his idol. Backstage, contestants rehearsed pop songs, K-pop routines, and dance performances filled with acrobatics. Daniel stood quietly in the corner, humming "Can't Help Falling in Love." A few contestants glanced at him and smiled politely, the kind of smile that says, "Good luck, you'll need it." When his name was called, his hands felt numb. The stage lights were blinding. The crowd buzzed with curiosity. The judges asked him what he did for a living. "I'm a delivery rider," he answered. "And what will you sing?" "An Elvis Presley song." A few audience members chuckled. Someone even whispered, "Another impersonator." Simon leaned back in his chair. "All right," he said carefully. "Let's hear it." The music began. For the first two lines, Daniel's voice was soft. Not weak, just controlled. Then the chorus arrived. And everything changed. His voice wasn't just similar to Elvis. It carried the same depth, the same velvet warmth, but with something extra. There was a vulnerability in his tone. A slight tremble that made every word feel personal. He didn't perform like a tribute act. He performed like a grandson honoring a memory. By the second verse, the laughter had vanished. By the bridge, people were standing. One judge's eyes filled with tears. Simon's expression shifted from skepticism to fascination. Daniel moved naturally, not exaggerated hip swings, not forced gestures, just subtle charisma. Confidence built with every note. When he hit the final high phrase, it soared effortlessly, powerful yet emotional. The last note echoed through the hall. Silence. A thick, electric silence. Then the explosion of applause. The crowd roared. People jumped to their feet. Some shouted his name. Simon leaned toward the microphone. "You know," he began, "I've heard thousands of people attempt Elvis. Most try to copy him. You didn't copy him. You made it yours. And honestly, there were moments where I forgot who you were covering. Daniel blinked back tears. For yes. Backstage, he collapsed into a chair and covered his face. Years of doubt poured out silently. For once, people weren't looking through him. They were looking at him. The journey forward wasn't easy. Online comments flooded in. Some praised him. Others said he was old-fashioned. Some claimed Elvis music had no place in modern competitions. The pressure weighed on him. What if the first audition was just luck? For the semifinals, he faced a choice: sing another Elvis classic or risk something different. He chose courage. He rearranged Suspicious Minds with a modern orchestral twist, blending classic rock energy with contemporary vocal runs. He wanted to show that legends can evolve. During rehearsals, he struggled. The new arrangement felt risky. He almost switched back to something safer. Then he remembered his grandfather's words: music makes poor men feel rich. On performance night, he walked on stage calmer than before. Not because he wasn't nervous, but because he had nothing left to prove. He closed his eyes and sang. This time, he didn't just impress. He commanded. The performance ended with a powerful vocal run that sent chills through the theater. The crowd erupted even louder than before. Simon smiled. You just proved that classics never die. They just wait for the right voice. Daniel advanced to the finals. On finale night, millions watched from around the world. Delivery riders gathered in small apartments. Neighbors crowded around televisions in Manila. His mother held his grandfather's old vinyl record close to her chest. Daniel stepped into the spotlight wearing a perfectly fitted white suit, a gift from the show's stylist. But before singing, he spoke. This is for my grandfather, he said softly. He believed music could make us brave. He performed If I Can Dream. But in the final chorus, he added a short Tagalog line about hope rising after storms. It was subtle, but powerful, a bridge between cultures, generations, and dreams. When he finished, there wasn't a single person sitting. Even Simon stood without hesitation. The results were announced slowly. Tension filled the air. Daniel didn't win first place. He placed third. But when the camera found him, he was smiling. Because something greater had already happened. The next morning, his audition video crossed 50 million views. Record producers reached out. Invitations for international performances followed. Most importantly, he paid off his family's debts. His mother no longer worried about rent. And in his grandfather's old house, music played again. Years later, when interviewers asked him how it felt to be called better than Elvis, he always shook his head. No one is better than Elvis, he would say. I just sang with my heart. And maybe that's the real lesson. You don't have to replace legends. You don't have to erase the past. You just have to bring yourself into the song. Because the world doesn't need another copy. It needs your version. So if you've been hiding your gift, if you've been waiting for the perfect time, maybe this is your sign. The stage might look scary. The judges might seem impossible to impress. People might laugh before you even begin. Sing anyway. And if this story inspired you, if it reminded you that dreams don't expire, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Because the next unbelievable voice, the next underdog story, the next moment that makes the world stand up, could be closer than you think. When a Filipino sang Elvis, and sounded even better, the judges exchanged amused glances, but 3 minutes later, one of them was wiping away tears, and the audience was chanting his name. If you've ever been told you're too late, too different, or not enough, stay with me until the end of this story. Because what happened that night wasn't just about music, it was about proving that your background does not define your ceiling. And if stories like this inspire you, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel, because sometimes one story can light a fire you didn't even know was inside you. In the province of Pampanga, Philippines, where rice fields stretch endlessly under golden sunsets, lived a 29-year-old tricycle driver named Rafael Rafi Mendoza. His days began before sunrise. He would wipe down his old blue tricycle, check the engine twice, and drive children to school and workers to factories. His hands were rough, his skin tanned by the sun, his clothes always faintly smelling of gasoline. But Rafi had a secret. When passengers weren't around, he sang. He sang loudly on empty provincial roads. He sang while waiting for customers. He sang when rain poured so heavily that no one needed a ride. His voice would echo through the fields, startling birds into flight. And the songs he loved most were by Elvis Presley. It started with his mother. She worked as a housekeeper for a retired American couple who left behind a box of old cassette tapes when they moved back to the United States. Among them were Elvis compilations. Rafi was 10 years old when he first pressed play on a worn-out cassette player. The voice that came through the static felt powerful, confident, alive. Rafi wasn't fluent in English then. He didn't fully understand the lyrics. But he understood emotion. Life wasn't easy for his family. His father passed away from illness when Rafi was 16. College became impossible. Responsibility replaced dreams. Singing became something he did only when no one was watching. Except, someone was watching. One afternoon, while Rafi sang Always on My Mind on a quiet roadside, a young woman recorded him from inside a parked car. She posted the video online with a simple caption, "Tricycle driver sings like Elvis." Within days, the video exploded. Comments flooded in. "He sounds unreal. Is this edited? Send him to a talent show." At first, Rafi was embarrassed. Fame was never the goal. But then a message arrived from a casting producer of America's Got Talent, inviting him to audition. He thought it was a scam. He almost ignored it. His mother didn't. "This is your chance," she said firmly. "Not to be famous, but to see how far you can go." With community donations and help from strangers online, Rafi boarded a plane for the first time in his life. As the aircraft lifted off, he gripped the armrest tightly. "If I can survive Pampanga traffic," he whispered nervously, "I can survive this." The theater in America felt like another planet. The stage was massive. The lights were blinding. The judges' panel looked intimidating, especially Simon Cowell, known worldwide for his brutal honesty. Backstage, other contestants wore glittering outfits and had professional vocal coaches. Rafi wore a simple cream barong Tagalog paired with black trousers. He wanted to carry his culture with him. When he walked on stage, his humble introduction made some people smile kindly. "I drive a tricycle," he said shyly. "And what will you sing?" Simon asked. "An Elvis song." There it was again, the subtle ripple of skepticism through the audience. Simon sighed softly. "Okay. Let's see." The band began playing the opening notes of If I Can Dream. Rafi closed his eyes. The first note came out soft, almost fragile. Then the second line came stronger. By the time he reached the chorus, something extraordinary happened. His voice didn't just resemble Elvis, it carried a richness that felt lived in, weathered by struggle. There was grit in his lower register, smooth silk in his higher notes. He wasn't imitating. He was interpreting. Every word sounded like a man who had truly dreamed of something bigger. The audience leaned forward. Simon's expression shifted. When Rafi hit the climactic high note, it wasn't forced. It soared effortlessly, ringing through the auditorium with clarity and power. And instead of ending with dramatic flair, he softened the final line into a whisper, intimate, vulnerable. Silence. Then thunder. The crowd erupted into a standing ovation that seemed endless. Judges rose from their chairs. One judge pressed her hand against her heart. Simon stood slowly, nodding. "I didn't expect that," Simon admitted. "That was stunning. You have something very rare. It's not just the tone. It's the sincerity. Rafi's eyes filled with tears. For yes. But the real battle began afterward. Fame brought pressure. Online debates erupted. Is he better than Elvis? Is this hype? Can he survive the next round? For the semifinals, Rafi considered switching genres. Maybe a modern pop song would prove versatility. But deep down, he knew his strength wasn't trendiness. It was authenticity. So he made a bold choice. He performed Suspicious Minds, but infused it with subtle Filipino musical elements, a gentle kulintang-inspired rhythm woven into the arrangement. It was risky. It was different. During rehearsals, producers worried it might be too experimental. Rafi almost backed down. Then he remembered the long roads in Pampanga, the empty fields that heard his voice before anyone else did. On live television, he delivered the performance of his life. It was electric. Powerful. Fresh. The audience didn't just clap, they roared. Simon grinned widely. Now that, he said, is how you reinvent a classic. Rafi advanced to the finals. On the final night, he stood under a storm of lights, thinking about his tricycle parked back home. He thought about his mother listening from a neighbor's television. He thought about the little boy who once sang along to a static-filled cassette. He took a deep breath. This is for every worker who thinks their dream is too small, he said. He sang Can't Help Falling in Love. But this time, he stripped it down, just piano and voice. No big runs. No dramatic tricks. Just emotion. Halfway through the song, his voice cracked slightly. Not from lack of control, but from feeling. And that crack made millions of viewers feel connected. When the final note faded, the audience stood immediately. The judges were visibly emotional. The results came down to the final two contestants. Rafi didn't win. He finished second. For a split second, disappointment flickered across his face, then gratitude replaced it. Because as confetti fell around him, he realized something profound. He was no longer just a tricycle driver who sang alone on empty roads. He was a voice heard around the world. In the months that followed, he signed a record deal. He toured internationally. But every time he returned home, he drove his old tricycle at least once around the neighborhood, not because he had to, but because he never wanted to forget where the dream began. People still argue online whether he sounded better than Elvis. Rafi always laughs when asked. No, he says. I just sang like someone who had nothing to lose. And maybe that's why it worked. Because sometimes, when you stop trying to be a legend and start being yourself, you create something even more powerful. So if you're sitting there thinking your job defines you, your accent limits you, your background disqualifies you, remember Rafi. Dreams don't check your bank account. They check your courage. If this story moved you, inspired you, or reminded you that your voice matters, take a second to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Because the next ordinary person who does something extraordinary might be you. When a Filipino sang Elvis, and sounded even better, the audience thought it would be a tribute act. 3 minutes later, they were witnessing history. Before we dive in, let me ask you something. Have you ever practiced something in secret because you were afraid people would laugh? Have you ever loved something so much that you protected it from the world? Stay with me until the end, because this story isn't just about music, it's about the moment fear loses and courage wins. And if stories like this inspire you, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel, because you never know which story will awaken your own dream. In a crowded neighborhood in Quezon City lived a 22-year-old call center agent named Nico Alvarez. By day, Nico answered customer complaints from halfway across the world. Thank you for calling, how may I assist you today? He would repeat with perfect scripted politeness, even when customers yelled. Night shifts drained him. The fluorescent office lights made every hour feel the same. But Nico had another life, one nobody at work knew about. He was obsessed with the music of Elvis Presley. His fascination started when he was a child. His grandmother owned an old DVD player and a scratched compilation of Elvis performances. Nico would sit cross-legged in front of the television, mesmerized by the confidence, the voice, the presence. But what fascinated him most wasn't the fame, it was the power in Elvis's voice. It felt fearless. Nico wasn't fearless. In school, he was shy. He stuttered when nervous. During presentations, classmates would giggle when his voice cracked. So he stopped volunteering. He stopped raising his hand. He learned to stay invisible. Except when he sang alone. Inside the small storage room of their house, surrounded by cleaning supplies and old boxes, Nico would practice every night. He studied breath control from online videos. He replayed live performances again and again, not to copy them, but to understand how emotion traveled through sound. Years passed. Singing became his escape from exhaustion and self-doubt. One evening, scrolling through his phone during break, he saw an announcement: open auditions for Asia's Got Talent were happening in Manila. His heart raced. He laughed nervously. Elvis? On a modern stage? People will think I'm stuck in the past. But another voice inside him whispered, or maybe you'll show them something new. For weeks, he battled himself. His co-workers talked about safe careers, promotions, stability. Nico almost convinced himself that auditions were unrealistic. After all, he wasn't a trained singer. He didn't have connections. He had a night shift and dark circles under his eyes. Then one night, after a particularly humiliating call where a customer mocked his accent, Nico went home feeling small. He looked at himself in the mirror and realized something painful: he had spent his whole life trying to sound like someone else. Maybe singing Elvis wasn't about copying. Maybe it was about reclaiming confidence. The audition day arrived. Nico wore a simple black suit borrowed from his cousin. His hands trembled as he waited backstage. Contestants rehearsed flashy pop songs and dance routines. He stood quietly, humming If I Can Dream. When his name was called, the stage lights nearly blinded him. The judges sat across from him, including the famously blunt Simon Cowell, who was a guest judge that season. What do you do for a living? One judge asked. I work at a call center, Nico replied softly. And what will you sing? An Elvis Presley song. A ripple of polite skepticism passed through the audience. Simon tilted his head. That's brave, he said. Elvis songs are dangerous. Everyone compares. Nico nodded. Yes, sir. The music began. The first line came out steady. The second line came out stronger. By the time Nico reached the chorus, something transformed. His voice deepened, rich and resonant. There was a surprising maturity in his tone, a smoothness that wrapped around the melody like velvet. He wasn't trying to mimic Elvis's swagger. He stood still, grounded, letting the emotion do the work. As he sang, memories flashed through his mind: the storage room, the fluorescent office lights, the mocking laughter in school. And then something incredible happened. The fear disappeared. He wasn't performing anymore. He was expressing. When he reached the climactic high note, it rang out clear and powerful, filling every corner of the theater. The audience gasped. One judge's jaw literally dropped. Simon leaned forward, eyes locked on Nico. The final note lingered. Silence. Then an eruption. The crowd leapt to its feet. Applause thundered through the auditorium. People who had expected an impersonation were witnessing something authentic. Simon spoke first. That, he said slowly, was not an impersonation. That was artistry. You didn't hide behind Elvis. You honored him, and then you brought yourself into it. Nico's eyes filled with tears. For yes. Backstage, he broke down completely. Years of insecurity poured out in sobs of relief. But success brought pressure. Online clips went viral. Some praised him as the Filipino Elvis. Others criticized him for reviving old music. Doubt crept back in. What if the audition was just a lucky night? For the semi-finals, Nico decided to take a risk. Instead of another Elvis hit, he arranged a mashup blending Can't Help Falling in Love with a subtle modern R&B twist. He wanted to prove he wasn't stuck in nostalgia. Rehearsals were brutal. Producers questioned the arrangement. Some suggested he stick to the original style. Nico almost backed down. But he remembered the call center customer who mocked his accent. He remembered deciding he would never hide again. On live television, Nico delivered a performance that silenced every critic. His voice flowed effortlessly between classic and contemporary styles. The blend felt seamless, respectful yet innovative. The audience exploded. Simon smiled broadly. "You just made Elvis feel current," he said. "That's very difficult to do." Nico advanced to the finals. On the final night, standing under blinding lights, he felt strangely calm. Whether he won or lost no longer mattered as much as this truth: he had proven to himself that he was capable. Before singing, he said softly, "For anyone who has ever been told their voice isn't enough, this is for you." He performed If I Can Dream. This time, he didn't hold back. His voice soared higher than ever before. It carried confidence, pain, hope, everything he had lived through. When he finished, the entire auditorium was on its feet. The results were announced. Nico finished second. For a brief second, disappointment flickered across his face. Then he smiled. Because he realized something powerful: he no longer needed a trophy to validate him. The shy boy who once hid in a storage room had stood on an international stage and owned it. Months later, Nico left his call center job, not out of resentment, but gratitude. It had funded his dream. He began recording music, touring regionally, and mentoring young singers who struggled with confidence. When interviewers asked if he thought he sounded better than Elvis, he always answered the same way. "No one replaces a legend. I just found my voice." And that's the message. You don't have to erase greatness to shine. You don't have to sound like anyone else to matter. Your voice, shaped by your struggles, your culture, your story, is already powerful. So if you're hiding your dream in a storage room, if you're waiting for the perfect moment, maybe this is it. Sing anyway. And if this story inspired you, moved you, or reminded you that courage can change everything, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Because the next voice the world needs to hear might be yours. When a Filipino sang Elvis, and sounded even better, the first few people in the crowd smirked, but by the final note, those same people were standing, hands over their hearts, completely transformed. If you've ever been underestimated, if you've ever felt like your dream didn't match your reality, stay with me until the end. Because this story isn't just about a song. It's about what happens when preparation meets one fearless moment. And if stories like this inspire you, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel, because sometimes one story can remind you who you're meant to be. In Davao City lived a 31-year-old mechanic named Andres Villanueva. His days were spent under cars, hands covered in grease, the scent of oil permanently stitched into his clothes. He wasn't ashamed of his job. In fact, he was proud of it. It fed his wife and their 5-year-old daughter, Maya. But music was his first love. As a teenager, Andres had been the lead singer in a small garage band. They dreamed of recording albums, touring cities, maybe even being discovered. But life moved faster than dreams. His mother fell ill. Hospital bills piled up. The band dissolved. Andres traded microphones for wrenches. Yet one thing never changed: his admiration for Elvis Presley. His father had introduced him to Elvis through old CDs played on a dusty stereo in their living room. "Listen to that control," his father would say. "That's not just talent. That's discipline." Andres didn't just listen. He studied. Breath support. Stage presence. Emotional phrasing. Even while tightening bolts under a vehicle, he would hum scales quietly. His daughter Maya loved when he sang her to sleep with "Can't Help Falling in Love." She didn't know who Elvis was. To her, it was just Papa's song. One evening, while Andres was singing at a small local fiesta, someone recorded him and uploaded it online. The caption read, "Mechanic sings Elvis better than anyone I've heard." The video began spreading quickly. Comments poured in. Some were skeptical. Some were amazed. A week later, he received an invitation to audition for America's Got Talent. He almost declined. "What if I embarrass myself?" he told his wife. She looked at him and said something he would never forget: Maya should grow up seeing her father chase at least one impossible thing. That was enough. Flying to America was surreal. Andres had never left the Philippines before. The city lights felt overwhelming. The theater stage felt enormous. Backstage, contestants rehearsed acrobatics and powerhouse pop songs. He felt small in comparison. When he stepped onto the stage, the judges greeted him, including the famously direct Simon Cowell. "What do you do?" Simon asked. "I'm a mechanic," Andres replied calmly. "And you're singing?" "Elvis Presley." A few audience members chuckled softly. Simon leaned forward. "Okay. Big shoes to fill." The music began, the opening chords of "If I Can Dream." Andres closed his eyes. The first note came out rich and steady. Not loud. Not flashy. Just controlled. By the second verse, the texture of his voice revealed something unexpected: depth. It wasn't a perfect imitation. It was warmer. Earthier. There was maturity in it, shaped by responsibility and sacrifice. As he reached the chorus, he didn't overpower the melody. He respected it. His voice swelled naturally, filling the auditorium with resonance that vibrated in the chest. The audience grew quiet. Simon's eyebrows lifted slightly. When Andres hit the climactic high note, it soared clean, unwavering, powerful without strain. The sound felt effortless, yet disciplined. And then came the moment that changed everything. Instead of ending dramatically, Andres softened the final line, almost like a lullaby, the same way he sang it to his daughter. The last note faded. Silence. Then an eruption of applause so loud it seemed to shake the stage. The audience stood instantly. One judge wiped tears away. Simon smiled, not his usual polite smile, but a genuine one. "You know what," he said. "That was technically excellent. But more importantly, it was sincere. You weren't trying to be Elvis. You were telling a story." For yes. Backstage, Andres broke down quietly. Years of postponed dreams flooded his chest. For the first time since his band dissolved, he felt that spark again. The semifinals brought pressure. Critics online debated whether he could sustain the momentum. Some accused him of relying too heavily on nostalgia. So Andres decided to take a risk. He rearranged Suspicious Minds with a modern rock edge, heavier drums, slightly faster tempo, while keeping the core melody intact. It was bold. It was dangerous. During rehearsals, there were moments when it felt unstable. He doubted himself. He thought about returning to the safer ballads. But then he thought about his daughter watching. On performance night, he walked on stage with confidence. The new arrangement exploded with energy. His voice adapted seamlessly, gritty in the verses, soaring in the chorus. He commanded the stage without forced theatrics. The crowd went wild. Simon laughed in disbelief. "You just reinvented a classic," he said. And it worked. Andres advanced to the finals. On the final night, standing under brilliant lights, he thought about his father's old stereo. About hospital bills. About grease-stained shirts. About the little girl waiting at home. "This is for my family," he said softly. He performed Can't Help Falling in Love. No heavy production. Just piano and voice. This time, he allowed every emotion to surface. His voice cracked slightly near the end, not from lack of control, but from overwhelming feeling. The audience stood before he even finished. The judges were visibly moved. When the results were announced, Andres finished second. For a brief second, you could see the flicker of disappointment. But then he smiled wide and proud. Because the real victory wasn't a trophy. It was proving to himself that the dream he buried under responsibility was still alive. In the months that followed, he signed a recording contract. He toured internationally. But he never quit being a mechanic completely. When he returned home, he still visited his old garage, not to fix cars, but to remind himself where discipline was built. When interviewers asked if he thought he sounded better than Elvis, he would always shake his head. Elvis was a legend, he'd say. I'm just a father who sings. And maybe that's why it resonated. Because greatness doesn't always come wrapped in glitter and fame. Sometimes it comes in grease-stained hands and quiet persistence. Sometimes it sounds familiar yet somehow deeper. And sometimes, when a Filipino sings Elvis, he doesn't replace the king. He simply proves that music has no borders. So if you're watching this and thinking your job defines you, your responsibilities limit you, your timing has passed. Remember Andres. Dreams don't expire. They wait. If this story touched your heart, inspired you, or reminded you of your own hidden talent, take a second to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Because the next underdog story that shakes the world might be yours. When a Filipino sang Elvis, and sounded even better, the audience didn't clap right away. They just stared as stunned, as if they had witnessed something impossible. Have you ever felt like your dream was too big for where you come from? Like the world had already decided what you could and couldn't become? Stay with me until the end of this story, because what happened that night wasn't just about a voice, it was about identity, courage, and the power of believing in yourself when nobody else does. And if stories like this move you, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. You never know, the next story might be the one that pushes you to chase your own dream. In a quiet fishing town in Batangas lived a 19-year-old hotel housekeeper named Luis Navarro. He was the youngest of 4 siblings. His father was a fisherman who left home before sunrise and returned long after dark. His mother sold dried fish at the local market. Money was always tight. Dreams were considered luxuries. Luis had a soft-spoken personality. He avoided confrontation. He rarely spoke loudly. In school, teachers described him as polite but invisible. But Luis wasn't invisible when he sang. His love for Elvis Presley began unexpectedly. A foreign guest once left behind an old portable speaker in the hotel where Luis worked. Curious, he turned it on while cleaning a room. The first song that played was Love Me Tender. The voice that filled the air was warm, commanding, timeless. Luis froze. He had never heard anything like it. From that day forward, during late-night shifts when hallways were empty, he would softly sing Elvis songs while pushing his cleaning cart. The echo of his voice down the corridor gave him chills. It felt powerful, like he was someone else entirely. One evening, another staff member secretly recorded him singing If I Can Dream in the empty lobby. The video was uploaded online with the caption, "You won't believe this hotel housekeeper's voice." Within days, it went viral. Comments poured in from all over the world. Go audition. This gave me goosebumps. He sounds incredible. Luis was overwhelmed. He had never even traveled outside his province. But then came an invitation to audition for America's Got Talent. He almost said no. What if they laugh? He asked his older sister. She looked at him firmly and said, "You've cleaned rooms for other people's vacations. It's time to step into your own story." The journey to America felt like stepping into a dream. The theater was enormous. The stage lights were intimidating. Backstage contestants stretched, vocalized, and wore sparkling costumes. Luis wore a simple navy suit bought with pooled family savings. When he stepped onto the stage, T.